Hello again, welcome to space. So I'm going to try bringing down this is the NAR, North American Rockwell MEM, Mars Excursion Module, which I'll link to the mod. I just did a previous attempt to land it, so now I'm trying to land it in Hellas Basin again with a bit more of a sharp descent. Can I actually see the rim? Maybe not yet, but we're definitely coming down. So I'm just going to go into the orientation. So this craft has the ability to produce lift, which is great. It is a stored propellant vehicle. The fuels, they are somewhat cryogenic in this design, and there's nothing in the mod that I immediately saw that kind of shows how they'd be chilling that, like to keep the propellants, even if they're mildly cryogenic, like liquid oxygen, certain things. Let's see, like these are just for life support, but say the liquid lithium hydrazine monopropellant, there, liquid methane, say, is one of the major propellants used by this vehicle. So that would have to be kept at cryogenic temperatures in order to not boil off. And this would be brought by a mothership from Earth, this lander, to Mars orbit, and then used in this context to bring a crew down to the surface of Mars for a short mission on the surface of a couple weeks or a month or so, and then back up to Mars orbit. So I'll have to look deeper in the mod. But, beyond like some kind of nitpicky realism overhaul, things like that, it's a very good vehicle. It's a reproduction of a kind of a historical planned craft for potentially bringing people to the surface of Mars with like late 70s, 80s type technology. And it would have taken many, many launches to build the mothership that would help get this to Mars orbit, and then take the crew, once they get back up into space, back to Earth. But it's a really neat mod with a lot of really neat parts. So let me just show you where it figures we're going to land. But with these numbers are really changing as the atmosphere bites. It doesn't really predict that terribly well, so let me just close that out. It does predict that we're going to be landing in Hellas Basin, not the lowest parts, but still it's one of the lowest parts on Mars, so that's what I'm aiming for. And it's holding, the craft is holding position remarkably well. It's only wandering up a little bit, but we're still increasing in our descent rate. Let me see, do I have this lit up right? Not really. I guess I haven't calibrated. I haven't set these up for recording yet in 1.2 since I haven't done any RP0 recordings. I'm still kind of adjusting because Kerbal Construction Time no longer wants to do simulations, which I guess I'm fine with. I mean, as a mod maker, they get to choose which things the mod does and does not do based on what they want to keep adding function of. So I think they suggest crash, K-R-A-S, however you spell crash with a K instead of a C. And it's given me a little bit of weird behavior sometimes, so I just kind of need to go through some basic tests. I might start like a really quick early RP0 career on my own just to quickly test and make sure I've got all the right mods configured nicely to actually be able to start recording RP0 in that install. Alright, so we're coming down. The atmosphere is definitely biting, and because the craft has an off-center center of mass, so if I kind of zoom inside the shell here, you can see it has a lab module down there, and various fuel tanks for the upper stage, fuel tanks for the lower stage down in there. So the parts that are inside are asymmetrically placed, and their masses vary, and therefore it generates lift like this. If you want to take a quick look at the FAR numbers, if you're a numbers nerd like me, and you want to see it's producing a lift to drag ratio, which is why it's producing lift, more and more lift. The more we are getting decelerated, the more lift this craft is generating. And it's just kind of wobbling around a bit. And of course these numbers are going to change as we go from through various hypersonic, supersonic, transonic ranges. So this base is warming up. Yeah, it's still warming up. So you can see the exposed skin temperature. That's why it's gone red. Oh, come on, don't move like that. There we go. And I've got a couple weird issues with it. Like the mod, which I'll link to, it has some realism overhaul configs, sort of. I don't know, I wouldn't personally consider them realism overhaul configs, in the sense that all the realism overhaul configs, kind of, the point is they come in a mod, they're kind of curated, so if somebody's nice enough to go and configure them, and then they kind of donate them to the realism overhaul community, then you don't have to, they don't have to keep looking at it forever. If nice person A configures the parts and then just hands them over to realism overhaul, that nice person A can continue to update it in the future if the mod is updated or KSP is updated. But if they go away, those are still accessible to people. Somebody else can volunteer in changes or improvements to those realism overhaul configs. So, but they are configs that make this craft work with real fuels, with tackless life support. It has that. It has some modules in here. If I look, come on. There we go. See, it says converters. I would change those names so it actually says what each of those is doing, but I assume like one is a fuel cell, and there's a carbon dioxide scrubber, etc. Imagine. So just like minor polish things like that, which I did I did personally for FASA and a couple of other mods where the realism overall configs were fairly good, and then some things were just a little odd or off, and that would change the kind of make it easier to use or easier to see. So I might volunteer to them some changes for this. So the skin temperature, there we go. So we've kind of passed through max heating, but we are still getting more and more deceleration, which from our perspective here is good. So I always keep a number of things very important to me for landing. So I actually get the true altitude. I have a mod installed here which is making this actually also reflect the true altitude, which is very nice. Because see here it's showing not the true altitude, and there it is. And we're coming down into an area where the air is much thicker on Mars than in most other places. It's well below, is it called the basis level? Something like that. You can think of it as Martian sea level, even though there isn't one. Like there's kind of an average altitude of the surface of Mars, like above the core of Mars, or however you want to think of it. And that's called the basis level. And so there are some points that are higher than that average and some points that are lower. But the way Mars is set up in RSS is that 0 altitude is the lowest point on Mars. But the atmosphere curves and such for RSS are set to make that kind of reflect that accurately. And you can see our shadow being rendered on the ground over there on a dune. It says 2 minutes till we are murdered by the ground. All right. We are still moving very fast. What does FAR say about that actually? Mach 10. All right. And the atmosphere is 0.2% as thick as the atmosphere on Earth is at sea level. But we are still pretty high above the surface of Mars, so I'm not terribly concerned. That's the lovely thing about the lift this is generating. So this is the landing stage of this. So we have over 1,000 meters per second of delta V in this descent stage. So as long as we're moving below 1,100 meters per second, we're kind of golden for landing this. It's just my fault and not too little delta V that kills us if we do die in that way. When we come down to say let's say below a minute, something like that, I'll release the parachutes. I will cut the parachutes before we reach the ground, just because they kind of throw off the center of mass of the craft. Like right now we're getting this lovely pitch, and I find it fairly easy to control. I'll think about it though. I might not even want to use the parachutes because they're definitely nice. Like it's just that they pull from this point rather than pulling from the center of mass, and so it kind of makes the craft a bit harder to control. For me here, I feel like it's the way things are. Like maybe with just the RCS as it is in this, you kind of want to choose between whether you use parachutes to slow you down or whether you're using a lifting body like this to slow you down. See, we're losing lots of speed, and as you can see, we're now on the downslope. We're decelerating slower and slower as our speed slows down. Just a moment here. Move my phone. All right. So we're decelerating slower. So the surface gravity of Mars is much lower than it is on Earth. And so this is actual deceleration from air. Once we're sitting on the surface, it's like 0.3, 0.4, something like that, G's. And so this is still definitely substantial deceleration. So we're down to about a minute now. I'm still pondering whether or not I want to use the parachutes. I'm going to use one of them, but not the other one, let's say. So which one is that? So I love that. So if you right-click on something in the staging menu here, you can actually pull that up, which is very nice, and then just pin it. So, all right. So I'm going to pop. So that popped the those guys. So this is an actual parachute. The other is a balut, which gives you a lot more deceleration. I think a balut is good for the hypersonic range, if I recall correctly. All right, so we're kind of getting down the nitty-gritty area, 40 seconds from smashing into the ground at more than Mach 1. So that parachute is pretty substantially deployed. So now I'm going to turn on the engine. Once we're at about 40 seconds from impact. Yeah, okay. And it's still giving us, we're still getting some decent deceleration, and I think a substantial portion of that is from the parachute, so we'll give it just a little longer, maybe at 35 seconds or something. Okay, that's good enough. So cut shoot, and I also staged at the same time. I hit space. It's giving me a little trouble controlling, but this engine has some wicked gimbal, which isn't entirely realistic, but I am extremely happy with the fact that it does do that. There's also that the RCS in this is very powerful. It makes it just a lot easier to control, which is very important to me in a craft I'm trying to land on Mars. All right, so suicide burn counter is kind of paramount here. We want to come down and ultimately have that around 0 when we hit the ground. Now, our I can probably close you now. Our thrust weight ratio is pretty high, and that's kind of what screwed me up last time I attempted to land this. So I'm going to try to get to a hover rather than just burn this until we're no longer heading towards the ground right at the ground. I'm going to try to get into a hover so I kill off this velocity that's kind of sideways here before we reach the ground, and then I can kind of level off so we're pointed up, and I've throttled substantially down so we can come in and control our velocity very substantially. Now, part of the issue here is the frame rate is low, because I think it's doing a lot of stuff, and I think KSP, at least for me, will only use like one core. I've got a many core processor, so it's recalculating the ground all the time. It's kind of showing everything that it's showing us. It's really tricky for it to do that. So see, it's starting to pitch up as we really kill this last velocity, and that's why I'm throttling down, because ultimately in the end we're just going to want to be pointed straight up. And we are approaching that point. See, we're still, even throttle down, we're still slowing our descent very, very substantially. So I'm just very lightly easing off the throttle, and the frame rate is just, we're going 1/3 of real time, but that's okay. So now I'm just going to tell it to point up, or I'm going to control it manually, basically. So I'm going to throttle really far down now so we can start falling towards the surface. So I turned that off because that may be risky, but I kind of want to chase this. No, up. So I want to chase that just a little bit, just to get us a bit more towards straight up. Okay, so now I'm going to throttle up a bit so we're kind of at a, whoa, what was that? It feels like we hit something in the air, which doesn't make any damn sense to me. Oh, did the engine shut off? What the hell? What happened? Okay, well, we're doing some kind of crazy breakdance, so I want to be pointed up. So let's see if we can get the engine to throttle up. So it feels like the engine throttles up at the wrong time there. Okay. So it's not doing force rotation, which is another thing I'd like it to do. Force rotation drop in progress. Land here. Now we're high enough above the surface, we're getting a good frame rate. Yeah, I don't know what happened. It acted like we hit something in the air. I don't know how that's possible. So we are going to have to use RCS or the engine or something yeah, sure, let's throttle up the engine since we don't, vapor in the feed lines, right? That's going to stop it from, because we're spinning so much, we can't throttle up the engine. That's going to be problematic. Yeah, I don't know. We were really close to a good landing there, and then it just kind of all of a sudden messed us up. And yeah, see, this isn't working perfectly for me now either. I don't know. I might have to try to build my my 1.2 RP0 install from scratch again, which would really suck because it was behaving well for me. But even just basic things like this, the kind of hyper edit lander tool is failing me, which is just extremely strange. How much? We're really oh, right, of course. That's a good point. I could definitely crank that up. The power of that RCS is just really absolutely consuming my RCS very fast. But I mean, ultimately, either I wait a long time to get it to stop, flitting around like that, or I just pump up the RCS power. And that's another thing. It's a bit overpowered. I'd have to look what would be reasonable for a craft like this. So let's try to. I know why. I know why force rotation isn't working. It's probably fighting with persistent rotation, which I didn't have installed in my 1.1 install near the end there. So I think that's it. So now it's just going to bring us down towards the surface, kind of correct for that issue. Yeah, I think I'm going to remove, I really like how persistent rotation previously, I haven't figured out if it's possible to do in the current version, but it previously had an option where if I turned on SAS and then time warped, it would kill the rotation. So for certain instances where it was useful for kind of expediency or recording, I could kill the rotation of something. But I don't believe it has that function anymore. Someone could certainly prove me wrong and let me know, but ultimately I just meddle with too many mods that I just don't know everything all the time. Alright, so we are letting it auto land us in the dark. As you can see, we didn't need to use very much of our delta V at all. Like when we used a lifting reentry and one parachute. But even if I hadn't used the parachute, we still would have been able to land in that location at least, without too much trouble. And I do want to try to land, kind of look at this test recording and other tests. There we go. So now we've landed. See, the ground isn't perfectly even. It's just, that's a fact, pretty much everywhere. But yeah, so we have landed on Mars. So let me time warp so it's sunny. Let's see what the life support supplies are doing there. Nice, and the sunrise is kind of blue on Mars, and then it kind of goes to the dusty light. Whoever set those up might have been one of a ton of people, but thanks to whoever got that working right. Got the colors of Mars' atmosphere behaving fairly nicely. We'll just turn on these converters, which I assume are tackless modules for life support. And it's going to start trying to dance now. So the way the crew would come up, they go from here. There's a connected module here. I haven't checked to make sure every component along the line has CLS for crew transfer, for only logical crew transfer setup. But that's how they'd go. They'd come from this capsule that they were in during the descent, and then down through a hatch here into this lab module where they could then head down by the toroidal engine or by a landing leg to the surface. And again, there's another weird thing. It just won't let me quick save, even though I'm in a sandbox. And not the literal sandbox of Mars, but just in a sandbox that I use for testing craft or kind of planning future missions. But yeah, here we are on the surface of Mars, and in a future video I will show how this beauty can actually ascend. But for the people who are curious of numbers for planning your own missions, this thing was about 55 tons in orbit, something like that, and it can land a pretty substantial amount of mass. If we weren't trying to head back home, if these didn't have to be fuel tanks and an ascent craft, you could send down a very substantial set of hardware to the surface of Mars. And that's why I'm kind of considering something like this, like maybe use this shell and these legs from my Mars Direct, because I could use, I could send down a fraction of the mass. I could send down something like this, except unfueled, and then have the hardware to make fuel, and this would just be like a big, a nice hefty sized human-sized lander that I could use to land it uncrewed and do the Mars Direct thing, produce the fuel here. People come down in another craft, and then this would allow them to head possibly all the way back towards home. But anyway, that'll be the end of this video. Thanks for watching the Fairly successful landing of the NAR MEM, which is made by, is it Tiktaalik Dreaming? Tiktaalik Dreaming, yeah, it's close-ish. And yeah, I'll link to that mod again. In the future, I hope to include my own craft file, because this is all scaled to realism overhaul sizes and such. Yeah, in a future video, I will ascend this baby to orbit. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.